This is a great article. I highly recommend you read it. I'm going to post a link below. Helen Andrews, I've actually read an article from her before, a couple of years back, on HR, the history of HR in corporations, and I would very much recommend that article as well. It stuck out in my mind. I read articles every day, but this one has stuck with me, and I've thought of it over the years since I've read it. And she's a good author. She's very good at articulating the problem of feminization, which is also the thesis of her HR article. But we have a greater thesis here, the great feminization. Highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to point out a few things. I'm going to walk through her thesis and point out a few things that I really like here. She begins with the story of Larry Summers, who was the president of Harvard and was forced to resign in 2005. He was canceled, and they see this kind of as the beginning of the woke era. The beginning of the woke era is when Larry Summers was canceled in 2005. Why? Most of all because of who did the canceling. Women. Women did the canceling. Larry Summers gave a talk that was supposed to be off the record, in which he talked about female underrepresentation in hard sciences, partly due to different availability of aptitude at the high end, as well as taste differences between men and women not attributable to socialization. So, of course, some of the female professors were offended, and they sent his remarks to a reporter in defiance of the off-the-record rule. They started canceling him. They wanted him to leave, eventually to resign. He resigned as president of Harvard. But the way they did it is very feminine. They didn't care about logical arguments. They made emotional appeals like this one. When he started talking about innate differences in aptitude between men and women, I just couldn't breathe because this kind of bias makes me physically ill, said Nancy Hopkins, who's a biologist at MIT. Now, this is not a logical argument, right? She's not saying he was wrong about innate differences. She was saying she was offended. It made her feel physically ill and couldn't breathe because of how emotionally offended she was by this. Now, what did Summers do? He made the mistake of apologizing. You never apologize. How many people still have to learn this lesson? The young Republicans yesterday still needed to learn this lesson. You do not apologize to women. You do not apologize to the left. They will not forgive you. They are trying to destroy you. Summers didn't know this back in 2005, though. He made multiple public statements, and the apology more insistent each time. Experts chimed in to declare that everything Summers had said about sex differences was within the scientific mainstream. As in, he was not wrong. Nothing he said was wrong. But remember, they don't care. These rational appeals had no effect on the mob hysteria. They don't care if he was right or wrong. They cared that they were offended. And so this cancellation was feminine, because all cancellations are feminine. Cancel culture is simply what women do whenever there are enough of them in a given organization or field. This is very important. This is kind of the thesis here. Whenever there are enough of them in a field and industry, you need to get a critical mass of women, and then you get wokeness. That's the thesis. Everything you think of as wokeness is simply an epiphenomenon of demographic feminization. So when you get enough women in your organization, you get woke culture. That's the thesis. I think this is a really good thesis. And she points out something important here. Often we don't see this because we think of feminization as something that happened a long time ago, and wokeness as being more recent. But remember, this is not about the first woman to attend law school in 1869 or the first woman to argue a case before the Supreme Court in 1880. This is about when there are enough of them. Because if you just have one or two women in your group, then they have to act like the men. But when you have more women than men, then eventually the men have to act like the women. That's the feminization, right? When you have more women than men, the men have to conform to the women's standards. So even though we had the first woman in 1869 to go to law school, It wasn't until 2016 that there were more women than men in law schools. When you look at that, that's a long time. It took over 100 years to get more women than men from the time when there was the first woman, right? Or when law firm associates became majority female, so when active lawyers were more women than men, that was 2023. It wasn't until 2023 that we had more women than men. This is the tipping point. This is the important tipping point. It doesn't matter necessarily when the first woman got in there. It matters when there were more women than men, right? It wasn't until even 2018 that we had more women than men at the New York Times, which is extremely liberal and left-leaning and progressive. They had more men than women there on staff at the New York Times until 2018. This is why wokeness happened, because wokeness was when there were more women than men. Medical schools didn't become majority female until 2019. College instructors were not majority female until 2023. It's all happening now. This great feminization is happening now. This isn't something that happened in the 1800s or the 1960s. It's happening right now. This is so important. This demographic shift is so important. Wokeness arose around the same time that many important institutions tipped demographically from majority male to majority female for the first time. And this is well understood. All honest researchers understand that there are different priorities to the feminine than the masculine. Empathy over rationality, safety over risk, cohesion over competition. We've had lots of work done here. One survey, for example, found that 71% of men said protecting free speech was more important than preserving a cohesive society, and 59% of women said the opposite. So a pretty good majority of men want to protect freedom over whatever you would call a cohesive society, and a good majority of women think the opposite. The opposite. So this is a very important thesis that we need to look at, and I have a few other thoughts, so I'm going to skip ahead a little bit and look at the rule of law will not survive the legal profession becoming majority female. I think that she is very smart to look at the legal profession. The legal profession is super important, and this is where we are going to see some big changes. As she said before, it's only just in 2023 that the majority of lawyers became female, but we still don't even have a majority judges being female. It's still actually a majority male judicial system on the bench. So we have to wait for that. But when the judges become majority female, that's when we're in big trouble. Big trouble. She says the rule of law is not just about writing rules down. It means following them even when they yield an outcome that tug at your heartstrings or runs contrary to your gut sense of which party is more sympathetic. Basically, you cannot have a legal system that is majority female. She points out the Title IX courts for sexual assault on college campuses established in 2011 under President Obama is what a feminized legal system might look like. And if you know anything about the Title IX courts, they were horrific. They were terrifying. They lacked many of the safeguards that our legal system holds sacred, such as the right to confront your accuser, the right to know what crime you are accused of, and the fundamental concept that guilt should depend on objective circumstances knowable by both parties, not in how one party feels about an act in retrospect. That last one is a shot to the rape accusations in these Title IX courts, because famously, you don't have to prove that a rape happened. They could, a consensual sexual act could become a rape post-fact if one of the participants deemed that they were not happy with what happened. And I hate this. I hate this. I hate the idea that you don't have the right to confront your accuser. Can you imagine being dragged into court for a criminal charge and you don't even know what it is or who is accusing you? That's what Title IX courts looked like, and that's what a feminized legal system might resemble. We really have to think long and hard if this great feminization is a good idea. She points out wisely here that the great feminization is truly unprecedented. Other civilizations have given women the vote, granted them property rights, or let them inherit the thrones of empires, but no civilization in human history has ever experimented with letting women control so many vital institutions of our society, from political parties to universities to our largest businesses. This is so important. We have never, ever done this. We have never allowed women this level of control of our society. Ever. Ever. Yes, you could point to queens, but you have never had the demographic feminization that she is pointing at here, where you have majority female departments of companies, of political parties, of legal systems. That has never happened before now, ever. And I don't think we can survive it. I honestly think this is one of the greatest threats to our civilization. We point to radicalization, we point to wokeness, but how much of that is just this demographic feminization? I think quite a bit. It's a topic nobody wants to touch. Right or left, nobody is against feminization. Nobody is pointing out that we need to get a majority male legal system, a majority male anything. That is actually illegal. That is actually illegal, as she points out here. Because if we believe this poses a threat to our civilization, the question becomes whether there is anything we can do about it. But the problem is we were forced into this. It's illegal to not have feminization. The most obvious being anti-discrimination law. It is illegal to employ too few women at your company. If women are underrepresented, especially in your higher management, that is a lawsuit waiting to happen. As a result, employers give women jobs and promotions they would not otherwise have gotten simply in order to keep their numbers up. This is the DEI argument, disparate impact argument. It is rational for them to do this because the consequences are so dire. Texaco, Goldman Sachs, Novartis, and Coca-Cola are among the companies that have paid 9-figure settlements in response to lawsuits alleging bias against women in hiring and promotions. No manager wants to be the person who cost his company $200 million in a gender discrimination lawsuit. So, therefore, anti-discrimination law requires that every workplace be feminized. As she says here, women can sue their bosses for running a workplace that feels like a fraternity house, but men can't sue when their workplace feels like a Montessori kindergarten. This is not fair. This did not happen because men and women just finally were able to compete on the open market and the women are winning. The women just won. They're just smarter or harder working. That's why we have more of them in law school. That's why we have more of them in every department. Every medical school has more women. That's why, because they're just harder working. That is not true. This was forced upon us. Forced upon us by the law. By the law. This kind of disparate impact is not okay. If we allow this to continue, what does it mean for our society? Well, let's take a look at an example of a feminized legal system, shall we? The UK. The UK has a very feminized legal system, and they see that same type of unfair reporting, unfair sentencing that we were just talking about, where you don't really go by the rules because you feel bad, right? You feel bad. Well, in this case, for example, a teenager named Omar Momenshi, who was not ethnically English, got 2 years in prison for punching and killing an 82-year-old man. Meanwhile, if you're a native Brit and you fart in a police officer's face, you can expect to spend nearly 3 years in jail. This man jailed for 34 months after farting in a police officer's face. If you look like this, you get the book thrown at you. But if you look like an immigrant, then they'll be lenient on you, because that is the class of people that the legal system feels bad for. That is feminized legal system. We cannot have this. We cannot have this. And of course, this affects our men, especially young men. This is why the young men are so radicalized right now, because they have grown up in this unfair, feminized world. Look at the teachers. Look at the teachers. When boys reach elementary school, 89% of their teachers are women. That's this purple bar here in the middle. That's elementary school. 89% are women. And in high school, 64% are female. So for their entire formative years, the system that our children are forced to undergo for their education is entirely feminized, run by feminine norms. How do you think that's going to affect your boys? Your young boys who are full of hormones, who don't have great self-control, who need to learn how to become a man, who need to learn how to walk in the world as a man. They won't learn. They will be constantly shut down for male impulses. Masculine-leaning men will be shut down by this system, and they will be taught how to operate in a feminine world. And what does that give you? It gives you 16% of men are married by age 30 in the year 2025. In the year 2025, 25% of women and 16% of men are married. The world's falling apart. It was not meant to operate this way. Men and women were not meant to live this way. It basically is the fact that women are okay living in a masculine world, but men are not okay living in a feminized world. That's just the facts. God made man to rule. God made man to set the norms of public society. This doesn't mean you can't have a feminized area in your society. Of course you can. You can have female areas. You could have female domains. You could have female dominated places. That's fine. But the norm of your society, your legal system, your political system, your medical system, your public institutions need to be male normed. They need to be masculine. That is how this civilization was built. That's how every productive civilization was built, even pagan ones. But here, as a Christian, in a Christian civilization, we have the words of God that say that our world should be male, should be masculine. And back in 1975, when it was pretty masculine, although the feminization had already started, but we were living in a male-dominated world, people were married by age 30. They were having kids. Here in 2025, when we got to that feminized world, they're not getting married anymore. And that is just one indicator of happiness. It is not good to be alone. It is not good for man to be alone. It is not good that only 16% of our men are married by age 30. That is not good. That is a blight. That is a curse on our society. That the average man cannot expect the average happiness of a marriage to a woman. Not even going to start on the sexual sin that we see rampant in our society, because there is very little chance of this man having a righteous marriage bed for him to experience a healthy sexuality. 16%. That's all we got. 16% of men. That's how many get married by age 30. By age 30. Back here in 1975, most of these men probably got married in their early 20s, early to mid 20s. So now we're waiting to age 30, and even then, only 16% are getting married. It's a terrible thing. It is not good for man to be alone, but I understand why these men are going their own way. MGTOW. Why are men going their own way? Because they live in a feminized world, and it sucks. It sucks to be a man in a world that hates you. Men, in general, are pretty decent towards women. I mean, I know there's abuse, but this is how the world has worked for, thousands of years. And yes, there's a feminist propaganda trope that men have abused women for thousands of years, but that is just not true. Men have loved women. Throughout time, men have written poetry about women. men have loved their mothers, their wives, and their daughters. And in the Christian church, men have loved their sisters in Christ. But when women get in charge, especially these atheist, godless women who are running most of our institutions in this day and age, they are completely merciless. They take their whims, their emotions as law, and then they are merciless. They are merciless. It is a tyranny that is only growing. It's only in the last few years that some of these key institutions have tipped female. We really need to be on the lookout for this and try to figure out how we are going to unravel it. I think she makes some great points in this article attacking disparate impact theory and anti-discrimination law. I really pray that we can see this through. This is a great article. Please check it out. Please wake up to the reality of the evils of the feminization that we are experiencing. Please support men as men and women as women. Please discourage women from taking over male traditional spaces and discourage men from acting feminine and weak. Encourage your brothers and sisters in Christ to adopt the gender that they were given by God, to glorify in the gender that they were given by God, and to become a godly man or woman as he sees fit, according to the words of God and the hearts and the spirits and the natures that he has put in us. Reject the modern propaganda around gender and return to the tradition that built this nation.